Okay, we're live. Sorry for the delay, everybody. For those of you guys waiting, there's probably going to be a couple of seconds here where people are hopping from one place to another. Thank you for bearing with us. Yeah, live streams are just real tough, and we've been trying, and we're not very good at them. But we think it's a cool format, and so we're going to try to keep it going until we work it all out. But while people are streaming in here, while you guys are joining us live on YouTube, I'd love to hear from you your take on this hot topic. What side of the fence do you sit on? Are you pro SDR model? Do you think it's dead? Do you hate it? Do you love it? We'd love to hear from you. And throughout the entire stream, we'd love to hear your questions regarding this model, why it works, why it doesn't, all of that stuff, because we're going to pose those hard-hitting questions to our wonderful guests. So I'm going to go around and do introductions here. I'd love for each of you guys to let us know, of course, where you sit on the matter and kind of a brief little summary, because we're going to really dive into it in just a little bit here. And just where you come from, kind of your sales experience. So I'm going to go around my windows here. In my top corner, we have Nick Casale. Please tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. Nick Casale. I'm the director of mid-market sales at Sendoso. As you can see here. Big fan of the SDR model, former SDR myself. And I think my most controversial opinion on the topic is I'm in the camp of thinking that SDR is a promotion path into AE, more so than sort of a standalone role on its own.
Cool. Can't wait to dive into that. And Michael Hanson, tell us about you and your stance.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for inviting me on today, Sarah. I am the CEO of Growth Genie. We're a B2B sales consulting company that empowers B2B sales teams to have better conversations through cadences, playbooks, and coaching and training. In terms of where I stand, I think outbound is always going to be important. For me, that's the main thing. You can't always rely on inbound. But I think potentially maybe an SDR is going to be called something else. Obviously, your founder, Aaron Ross, created this great book called Predictable Revenue, which talks about SDRs and AEs. But I think the SDR role has always been around. Like for many years, it's just always been called different things. So I think it's always going to exist. It's just going to have like different names. But yeah, happy to discuss a bit more about that later.
Very cool. Thank you. And Tito Bohrt, tell us about you.
Hello, I'm Tito Bohrt. I'm CEO at Alti Sales. Big fan of sales development. Been building teams for about 11 years. And I think SDRs are here to stay, and they're going to be more powerful year by year by year.
Very cool. So the reason we're doing this debate, this kind of comes off the heels of there's been a lot of anti-SDR stuff floating around the, LinkedIn world in the past little while. We held another debate a little while back with some people that were kind of vehemently on the other side of this debate. But, us, predictable revenue, we're going to back that sales development model, the SDR model, absolutely all the way. So we wanted to bring on some people that are doing it incredibly well, are kind of leaders in the space of proving out that this works and why it works. So that's what we want to dive into today. We've got 5 kind of set topics or set questions that we can go through. But of course, like I mentioned, I really want to hear from you guys what you'd like to know about the SDR model, why you should use it if you kind of aren't really into it, why it should win in this kind of debate of should it exist or not. So please jot those into YouTube. I've got my eyes on that chat. So anything that comes through, I will pose to everybody here. But to start off, this is a question, you mentioned it, Nick, as being a real focus for you, thinking that the SDRs are sort of a perfect training ground for that AE role. So the question is, and it comes up a lot in this debate, are SDRs a necessary and proper training ground for sales? Why or why not? And I'll go to you first, Nick.
I mean, 100%, right? And I think that there's plenty of data on it, but there's also just the subjective side of, talk to any great AE, and I think they'll tell you that their sales career and their foundation in sales started in that sales development world. There's no real sort of college for sales, yeah. Right? There's no formal courses that you can do. And of course, there's companies that are doing great stuff in terms of training. That's not what I mean. But SDR is how you actually cut your teeth in sales. Now, that's not to say that every great SDR has to go become an AE, but if you're trying to scale an organization with a direct sales model and an account executive team, you are going to absolutely get choked at scale if you don't have SDRs that are getting promoted up. You just cannot hire and train effectively 100% from the outside. Or if you do, you're just, I think, wasting resources. So having that sort of natural internal proving ground and being able to have some certainty and to reduce some risk. I know for us at Sendoso, our SDRs that move up into AE are some of our best AEs. And so that level of certainty that you can have is always higher than with an outside hire. And especially as we scale, it's something that we are doubling and tripling down on.
Right. And what do you think it is, just to dig into that a little bit deeper, what do you think it is about the SDR role that makes them then turn into great, AEs that are going to be consistent and you've got that trust?
Yeah, I mean, I think half of it is just the skills that no one ever stops to teach you until you get into sales, or frankly, even business, which it can be as simple as just how to word an email. I mean, when I started as an SDR, I didn't know what BCC was on an email. I didn't know how to use Salesforce. So there's just all of these really basic things that you learn by doing that role. And so in building up those small little skills, where if you just drop someone into selling, they're not going to have those skills. You build up the small skills, and then you start to build on, more and more complex skills, right? Being able to speak on the phone, mirroring, objection handling, and you start to really layer on these more and more complex sales skills in a way where it's pretty low risk at first, right? The worst case is really just that you don't get a meeting, and you learn from that, right? And you continue to improve and improve and improve, as opposed to if you're putting an AE in who, the risk there is high, right? The risk is that they lose people. That's pretty concrete.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, what do you think? You think AEs should come from SDRs always? That's the best kind of path?
Yeah, 100%. I agree with what Nick said, and we see that across a lot of our clients. Their best AEs often come from the SDR position, and they struggle often where they hire outside AEs and things don't work out, and it can be very expensive, obviously, when that happens. And obviously, they've got knowledge of the business. I think also what you should always do is have your SDRs attend at least 50% of the meetings that they're booking for AEs, so they can learn off the AEs as well. Because we've had some clients where we're like, no, we want the SDRs just booking meetings. They shouldn't be on calls with AEs, which I think is madness, because they're never going to learn about closing. And then the other thing is this comes that, because for me, it's this whole SDR thing about the outbound mentality and just having a very proactive attitude. So naturally, if you become an AE and you've been an SDR before, you've got that proactive attitude. So if I give you an example, you may get an inbound lead as an AE, and you've got, say, in our business, it could be the director of sales, right? And the director of sales is your champion. They're going to have a conversation with the CRO, with the VP of sales. Now, if they come back to you and you haven't been an SDR for a long time, maybe for 10 years, you're oh, I'm going to leave it. If you're in that proactive outbound mentality, you're okay, I can't get through from the director of sales. I'm going to cold call the VP of sales. I'm going to cold call the chief revenue officer. I'm going to connect with them on LinkedIn. So actually, it's just about having that proactive mindset. It's really important as an account executive as well as an SDR. And that's why SDRs often do really well as AEs.
Right. And we see success even on AE teams where there is a great, robust SDR team producing those opportunities, that a degree of an AE's pipeline should still be self-sourced, right? So do you think that creates an impact there?
Yeah, 100%. And that's the other thing, of course. There's a really good SDR at one of our clients who's going to be promoted to an AE next month. And what he's doing already is building meetings for himself, building pipeline. And the thing is, we all know how sales is, right? It's up and down. So naturally, there's going to be some months where marketing gets you loads of leads, but there's going to be another month where it's quieter. And obviously, during that time, if you're less busy, if you can fill that time with prospecting activities, it means, in the next quarter, you've got a load of pipeline ready, rather than being oh, now I've got no pipeline because I haven't been prospecting. So yeah, 100% that works.
Absolutely. And Tito, in your, decade plus building out these teams, have you seen consistently that, the training ground of an SDR role does make a big impact, kind of regardless of the type of company and all those types of things?
Yeah, I don't know if this is the most useful debate. I think the place where we need to start is what companies need SDRs, what companies don't need SDRs. Do I think SDRs can always succeed in any tech company? No, I don't think so. If your average deal size is under 30K, throw your SDRs out the window. You don't need any. It's just too much spend for for deals that don't need them, right? And the second thing you gotta think about is like, what types of leads are your SDRs going to be working? Like an SDR that's only working inbound leads, like demo requests, contact us forms, like the amount of training they need is minimal. Like you just need to do a little bit of data research and like figure out, is the account that's sending a contact us form qualified or disqualified? And then just sending times to schedule a meeting. If you're going to do cold outbound versus like more qualified leads that have maybe come to a webinar, well, then your SDR needs to have attended the webinar and at least have industry knowledge and understand like what are the sorts of questions that these personas are going to have about the product. So I wouldn't just put it, black and white, like, oh, your SDRs need X training or X background or X. Like, start at the beginning. Like, is your ACV justifying an SDR first and foremost? And second, like, what is the sort of motion that you're going to run? Is it cold outbound? Sure. Is it inbound only? That's what I think about first.
Absolutely. And those are a couple of questions that we're absolutely going to tackle. This question around the kind of SDR being the training ground for sales is one particular that has been thrown at us to answer for this debate. So I just wanted to get everyone's take on that. Absolutely. We're going to dive into when it's necessary, how to make it, the best it can be. But in your experience, just specific to this question, like, is the SDR the best option for a future AE, or have you seen something different? Or is maybe the trade-off of having an SDR in order to make them an AE not good enough? What is your take there?
I think the SDR is a fair option for being an AE. I think if you're trying to optimize, like what are the best sellers? Like, I think that the best sellers I've seen have been buyers before. Once you've bought stuff, you know how to sell. So now, can you put people in positions of buying first before they sell? Usually not, because becoming an experienced buyer is also a whole other journey, right? So I do think the SDR is a fair start to becoming a seller, but it's also a fair start to becoming a customer success manager. And it can also be a fair start to becoming a marketing manager if you're going to do like B2B advertising or other things like that. So I just think overall, if you have good training, the SDR role is a great starting point for people joining your company that can be high value long-term and keep them around for a long time.
Very cool. Well, let's dive into a question that I know that you want to tackle then. So this question is, are SDRs necessary for early stage companies? Tell us about how you make that determination then, Tito.
I think for me, it's the average deal size, right? Because here's the way you got to think about it. If you have an SDR, I'm going to be spending, base salary, commissions, taxes, benefits, insurance, tools, training, management, blah, blah, blah. That SDR, if you run the math, and we can get into the financial models of venture capital groups and so on and so forth, and look at CAC payback periods and revenue payback metrics and so on and so forth, your SDR needs to get $250K to $300K in revenue in a cold outbound capacity in order to justify their expense. And if they are working MQLs, they need to get closer to $400K to $500K. Now, think about it. If your average deal size is 10K and you need to get to 300K cold outbound, they need 30 deals. We need 30 deals, and you're closing 10 to 15% of the deals that you source, or the meetings that you source. Holy cow, like, you suddenly need 450 meetings a year. You need 40 meetings a month cold outbound. Like, you're never going to be able to do 40 meetings a month cold outbound for an SDR. It just doesn't happen, not in today's day and age. So an average deal size of 10K, you're dead. You shouldn't have SDRs. Where does it start working? Maybe at the 30 to 50K ACV, definitely at over 50. And if your ACV is over 100K, you should definitely have outbound SDRs. So I don't think it's about, what stage of the company you're at, but it's more about like, what type of ACV do you have? And again, I'm talking cold outbound. There's a lot of companies, if you have product like growth and like free trials and things like that, you can start using other tools to see the engagement, and even have a very small SDR team, even if your average deal size is 10 to 25K, but it's not the first motion you build. It's a much later motion once you have a really good marketing team.
I think to that point though, I don't know if it's fair to say unilaterally that there's one deal size. I think that there is a world where if your deal size is 15, it can work, or 25, it can work. I think that's a gray area, and it becomes a question of what's your cost model on the SDR side, right? Like an SDR can theoretically cost you anywhere from 40K up to 150, 200K. So that's a big difference, right? When you think about what the fully burdened cost of an SDR is. So I just think to Tito's point, do the math, right? And understand if it does make sense. But the other decision that I don't see companies being intentional about enough is, do you want an expensive and maybe more specialized SDR team, or are you going to get away with a lower cost SDR model? And that gets into, thinking about where you build out that team, especially now with, remote being a possibility. So I would encourage people to do the math. There's plenty of sort of models out there to look at and understand sort of the CAC and the payback period. But I don't think it's fair to just unilaterally say like 30K is the line.
Yeah, I would say that's a great point. It depends on obviously the tooling, the cost of the data, there's so many other things that factor into the opportunity cost of outbound. And it's about working backwards. Yeah. Incorporating those costs. Like, what is the minimum deal size that you can, if you close, cover? Like, what's the ROI on outbound for you, considering all of those costs? So, I mean, for an example, I work with a client who pretty much, uses outbound alone. They don't even have inbound. They're not bothered with marketing because the people that they're reaching out to are just not anywhere that they can put the advertising. They're reaching out to like kind of mom and pop furniture store owners. The only way to get through to those people is to phone them at their store. And they're one of these anomalies that are booking up in the 40, 45 demos a month type range, because they're catching the people on the phone, but the deal size is only about $3,000. Not one that we would recommend traditionally, as something that would pay back in terms of outbound, but the math absolutely makes sense. At this company, pretty low cost. They can get their data just from a website pretty quick. They're getting the opportunity volume they need. So yeah, I would agree. It's all about the math. But on the early stage side, to dig in more with you, Nick, because I know the SDR model was huge for you in building out Sendoso. So what do you think about SDRs at early stage companies?
Well, I think it's absolutely critical, especially because one, the biggest thing you're trying to do super early stage is get your name out there, right? And unfortunately, or I guess there's plenty of debate about this, but volume is the most important thing early too as an SDR. And you don't have marketing support, or at least when I was the first sales rep at Sendoso, we didn't have marketing support, and I was doing a ton of outbound myself, but we brought on SDRs very quickly to support those outbound efforts. And really, it was about going wide and informing people that we existed, period. So I just frankly wouldn't know how to even go about getting those first few meetings when you're starting up, unless you go outbound. And there's only so much that you can do on your own, especially if you're effective at it. You end up with a full day of meetings. So, something's got to give. And bringing in that support from an SDR function early on is absolutely critical. And you don't have to be as tactical about it as you do later, right? It's just about kind of go, run, send some emails.
Mm-hmm. And Michael, the companies that you've worked with that are kind of building out, I mean, the company as a whole, taking it to market for the first time. We're not even talking about building the sales development function for the first time here. It's real just early stage. What have you seen there?
Yeah, I can probably talk about Growth Genie. Like when I was trying to build it myself, I was like a one-man consultant basically to start, because most of our clients, they're set up, they've got like at least 5 SDRs, but if I'm looking at myself when I started my business, I just had to go outbound, right? No one knew who we were, right? So I had to go out and get the name out there. So I think in the whole question of, do you need SDRs when you're an early stage company? I would say you definitely need to be doing outbound, because naturally when you first start your company, people don't know who you are. You're not going to suddenly switch on your website and get a load of inbound leads. So you need to go outbound. So maybe you could hire like a full cycle salesperson. They're very rare nowadays. They used to be quite common, but that's, I think, this whole debate you were having before around like A's doing their own prospecting. I mean, it's definitely a bit of a pet peeve of mine, and I've seen it across companies where you've got this new kind of persona in SaaS, which is basically like an account executive who is always saying to marketing, where are my leads? Who's saying to SDRs, where are my leads? And there's not that responsibility to say, hey, you can generate your own pipeline. Hey, you can make a good example to an SDR. So for me, the ideal person at an early stage company is like a good full cycle sales rep who can generate their own leads and close their own business. But for me, it's, as I said, it's not really about the SDR. It's more just about having someone that can do outbound and get like their own book of business.
Right. It's the prospecting that's the most important thing, regardless of who does it at this stage.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. continuing on with our idea, going back a couple of minutes to the AE stuff, we've got a question from the chat saying, prospecting as a skill set, as a function is completely different from closing, from selling. It's about gaining permission to even have that conversation about the sale. So why is it a good preparation for an AE role when it requires a completely different skill set? And Tito, I'll ask you that question first.
Again, as I said, I don't think the SDR is the best place to prepare for being an AE, but here's what it gives you. It gives you the ability to start conversations, and it gives you the ability to shadow your AEs and seeing other people doing the job. So that's what I always believe. If you want to see what it's like to be a doctor, go shadow a doctor for a week. You'll see what it's like to be a doctor. It's not the thing that you think it is when you're a kid, right? Like everybody wants to be a police officer when you're like 3 years old. Go see what a police officer does all day. Do you want to be a police officer now? Right? It's very, very different. So I think the SDR just gives you the exposure. It also helps you understand things like, who are the buyer personas? What are the things that they care about? How do you communicate value? And when you hear those conversations via phone, email, LinkedIn, whatever, when somebody is like, oh yeah, like that would be cool. Like, oh yeah, I'd love to see that product because if it can do X, I really want to see it. Then as an AE, you start understanding what are the value drivers and how you unsell status quo and sell new products. So that's my view. It's just the amount of exposure you get and the collaboration you get with the AEs.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. Michael, what do you think?
In terms of
just like it's a different skill set. So why is it a good training ground then? If negotiation, persuasion, all those things are on the selling side. We definitely don't touch on those as an SDR or as a prospector. So why does it work?
Yeah, I think it's that I would say where the overlap between being an SDR and an AE is that discovery bit. So if one of you're getting on those initial calls with the AE, and I think the way things are going now as well with on the AE side is I think before. And I think this is a question later you're going to talk about, but like, is the SDR model broken? I think one of the ways that the SDR model is broken at the moment is you used to have this process where essentially an SDR would do this discovery call and they would just interrogate the buyer. They wouldn't give them any valuable information. They would get that information and they give it to the AE. They book a call for the AE. The AE then again interrogates the buyer, and the buyer's like, I've just told you answers twice in a row. I'm just getting interrogated. It's like you're at a bloody police station getting interrogated by the police. But anyway, that's why it's kind of broken. But a good process, what it looks like is the SDR does a bit of discovery, books a call for the AE, does an intro, say this is what I found out, and then the AE is going into a bit more detail, does a demo that's relevant. So that's where it's relevant. I think shadowing the AE, especially if it's a good AE, seeing the discovery that they're doing, seeing the demo. And it's exactly like Tito said, right? It's like if you're shadowing someone, you're going to learn what it's like. And I've seen, obviously, we're working with SDRs a lot, actually see what, because they work a lot with the AEs. As Tito said, a lot of them don't want to become AEs. They want to become CSMs or they want to go into marketing because they see like AEs are under a lot of pressure. Sales is tough. And even being an SDR is tough because you've got a target. You don't have a deal close target, but you've got a meetings or ops target. And they think, I want out of this, right? I don't want this pressure. I want to go into marketing or I want to go into CS or whatever it is. So I think it's just giving them some exposure to sales and like the tough aspects of sales. And I think the good thing about being an SDR from like a mentality, we talk a lot about the psychology in Growth Genie, is you get told no as an SDR more than anyone else in the company, right? So the main thing we actually look for really in SDRs, and we ask this in the interview process, is like, tell me an example of when you failed and how you overcame it, because you've got to be resilient. Like even if you're the best SDR in the world, you're still going to get 90% no's. Like a 10% conversion rate is incredible. So it's that really like getting used to rejection, and that can put you in good stead when you become an AE.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. And yeah, you're right. We're going to dive into where we think the kind of model has been misinterpreted and gone awry and how we can fix it. But before we get into that, we've talked about the early stage thing and why we think it's necessary there or potentially not necessary. But what I'd like to hear is on the scaling side. And Nick, you spoke to this as one of the, key reasons that you love that model. Why do you need SDRs to scale a company? I'll start with you, Nick.
Well, you need pipeline, right? So if you can figure out a way to get that without SDRs, hats off, more power to you. I guess that's great. Of course, there's, the sort of trend of product generated leads or product led growth, which is great. Again, like if you can generate enough leads without SDRs for your AEs to eat and you're hitting your goals, Again, hats off. That's not how it works though at most B2B tech companies that I know, and the ones that are successful. I think there's a reason that, if you look around and Salesforce has one of the biggest SDR orgs out there. You look at, Adobe, Splunk, like any big public tech company has it. So a little bit of it is don't overthink it here, right? Like the model is out there, there are playbooks, like this can be done right. And I think that's my problem with a little bit of these sort of, the SDR model is dead. Talk track is like for people who say that, like, do you really believe that? Or are you just looking for attention on LinkedIn? Because it's just not true, right? Like it's just based on the data, not accurate. So, I understand it's just a catchy headline, but every business needs pipeline. Every business needs cash, needs dollars, needs oxygen, needs money, and you need pipeline and you need growth. So, again, unless if you find some other way to get pipeline, congrats, but I don't believe you.
Cool. Tito, I know you'll have some thoughts on this, of course, because of all the sort of variables that are at play here. So do you think you can scale the average B2B SaaS tech company without an SDR?
Yeah, no, I agree with what Nick said. I think you need them. And then it's not only do you need SDRs, it's all about how you build your team, right? Like who's in charge of finding the data, who is in charge of figuring out what are the target accounts, who's in charge of determining the buyer personas, who's in charge of making sure the AEs handle those conversations and move into pipeline at a reasonable rate, who's in charge of training SDRs, in charge of training AEs. So the model continues to evolve, right? In the early days, I know I was saying you don't need SDRs if your average deal is under 30K. And then there's, of course, a couple of exceptions. And then there were some arguments on like, you still need to do outbound. Yes. But at the end of the day, like, the model starts with just maybe one person with a few tools and like not a lot of enablement. And I think this turns, like you see in the big organizations, you have SDR managers, SDR operations, SDR enablement, and all other sorts of like people that are purely dedicated to the SDR function and help it do what it needs to do, which is pipeline generation.
For sure. And Michael, what about later stage companies that you've worked with Growth Genie? How do they continue to evolve and grow that team? And what is the impact that you see there?
Yeah, we've had quite a few examples where generally companies will get to a stage where through inbound, they're just a large percentage of their inbound needs are unqualified. And then also they're a lot smaller average deal size, which goes into Tito's point. So I think eventually, like an example I always give, I actually gave Brian Halligan, the CEO of HubSpot, give a talk once, and they're obviously like the kings of inbound marketing. They're kind of known for inbound marketing. And he said eventually they got to a point where they really needed to focus on outbound, and it was to increase their average deal size. Because the thing is, when you do outbound, and let's call that role the SDR, right? You got outbound SDRs. They can choose exactly who they want to target. Whereas anyone can come to your website, fill out a form. You can't really filter that. So that's where like outbound becomes really important. And generally most of the later stage companies we see, the outbound, the deals generated from outbound, they may have a longer sales cycle, but they always have a bigger average deal size because you're controlling exactly who you want to target with that. So yeah, I think as your business is progressing, I think SDRs become really even more important when you're kind of targeting those enterprise deals.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. Nick, you look like you had a thought there.
No, I was reading the question get dropped in.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to get, Elise, I see your question. And if there's another question, I'll come to it. I just want to make sure that we tackle all the issues we want to get through. We will come back to those. Okay, I think we're on a good sort of path here, segue from all the things that need to happen in order to make the SDR model successful. It's not just a lone SDR and like, great, good enough. Now the SDR model is perfect. There are all these other things that go into it. And therefore, there are all these things that can be done badly that give this whole thing a bad reputation. So poorly done prospecting being one of those things. Like when we're talking about these loud voices that talk about anti SDR model, it's like the telemarketing, LinkedIn spam, email spam, and gift card sort of coercion type techniques, which I think all of us on this call and probably a lot of other people would agree aren't what the pro SDR model types are even sort of touting as a good way to go about it. So if poorly done prospecting is giving this model a bad reputation, is the answer, is the sort of antidote to that problem better research, better customization, like more thoughtful outreach? What do you think, Tito?
Yes to everything, right? Like, here's, as a prospect, the experience that I would like to see being like on the receiving end of sales development, right? First thing, call me. If you're not calling me, what are you doing, right? Like, then have you seen my inbox? I got like 700 emails today. You're another one of those, I'll immediately block you, right? If you call me, you have a better chance. So call me. If I don't pick up, send me an email, says I called you, maybe even the subject line, I don't know, whatever. And then says, Tito, I was reaching out to you because XYZ 1, 2, 3, make it short and to the point and personalize it. Even better, you saw something related to HR. Tito, saw on your website you're using Greenhouse as your ATS, and on LinkedIn you're hiring SDRs and account executives. Thought you might find this interesting. Here's what we do. Cool. I'll read that. And if I'm not interested, I'll reply. I'll say no, thank you. But show me you've done a little bit of research and this isn't a blast email. Cool. I don't respond to your cold call. I don't respond to your email. Follow me on LinkedIn. That'll get my attention, or a lot of people's attention, right? Because not a lot of people get followed. If I don't do that, what are you doing with advertising? Like, one of the things that we do is we do personalized ads. So like, if I'm trying to reach out to IBM will see a personalized ad on LinkedIn that says, IBM, let's build your world-class SDR team. People at IBM see it. What happens? Like in every channel, 95% of people will ignore it. 95% of people will ignore your email. 95% will ignore your call. 95% will ignore your LinkedIn ad. Next thing, send me a LinkedIn email. Cool. Doesn't work. Send me a text message. Doesn't work. Leave me a voicemail. Doesn't work. Call me again. Doesn't work. Send me another email or bump it. Doesn't work. Like, you just want to get 1 to 2% conversions in all of those and try to have 7, 8, 9, 10 steps that feel really good. If you have a 10, 12, 15 step sequence that feels really good, and in every step you're converting 1%, by the end of the sequence, you've converted 15% of your prospects into meetings, 5 prospects per account. You're converting a huge number of your accounts into meetings. You just need to keep increasing the quality. Now, am I saying hire an SDR and have him do LinkedIn ads, phone, email, LinkedIn, SMS? No, it's impossible. You can't do it. So the maturity of your organization will allow you to continue to build upon quality. The biggest mistake I see people do is they just want to ramp up quantity. Oh, let's hire more SDRs so we can do more work. I don't think that's the place we're going. I think the place we're going is, let's hire more SDR enablement. Let's hire more SDR training. Let's hire more SDR ops. Let's hire better data researcher. Let's buy more tools, and let's orchestrate around SDRs and empower them to do much, much higher quality work. And that's where I think the industry is going. And you're going to be able to hunt for big deals that way as well. And you get the attention. The VP of marketing at Coca-Cola, you know how many prospecting emails he gets a day? 150. And that's the guy that has the $100 million budget. So like, that's the guy that can spend $1 million on you. The real end goal is, how do you build an SDR team that can get the attention of that person and have them come to you, and then have your AEs do a good presentation where even if they don't buy immediately, they look at it and say, holy cow, Sarah, you rock. I like your product. I'll come back to you in the next 6, 8, 12, 15, 25 months. Doesn't matter. I'll come buy this. The sale isn't made when the signature is put on paper. The sale is made when the psychological journey is triggered and the prospect says, I am going to buy this. I don't care if the buying decision is going to be made or if the signature is going to be put on paper 24 months from now. The moment the prospect says, I will buy this at some point, you've won a battle. And that's the role of the SDRs, to get the prospects to that level.
Interesting. Nick, tell me your thoughts on that. Because one of the things you said earlier, and especially in an early stage company, is that volume is important. So how do you strike that balance then to make sure it's not this kind of poor quality prospecting when you're trying to hit volume?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a delicate balance early on. Inherently, you're not going to be sort of as annoying. And I think where a lot of people's complaints come from with this is triggered by 1 or 2 companies or people for them that's very visceral, and they're like, oh man, that company just like, that guy just keeps emailing me. And it's 1 or 2% of the outreach that they're getting that for some reason is just viscerally very, very upsetting. And that's totally fair. When you're really early stage though, no one's heard of you yet. So inherently they're not annoyed by you yet. Right. So just like, just get a lot of volume out there. It's fine. You can always tack back to personalization over time. And inherently you're going to have to. So I'm not saying like go blast out a bunch of crap when you're an early stage startup. I'm just saying you got a little bit of a leash for a while because people don't know who you are and you're doing marketing, right? There's no email marketing coming from you. So you're kind of the only marketing the company has. It's okay to go wide with that stuff. Now, over time, I completely agree with Tito. You have to get more and more and more personalized just because the fight for attention is insane these days, right? Digital noise has the amount of emails sent per day has doubled since COVID started, I believe is the data point. So yeah, digital noise is on the rise. It's absolutely harder than ever to get people's attention. And the role of the SDR is becoming more and more to sort of fill in the space between the automation, I think. And it's, a lot of teams and SDRs, I think, lean too heavily on the tools at their disposal and don't add in that, the sort of human element to it, which is really where sort of that magic happens, right? Like what Tito was saying, it's that genuine, curiosity. It's that those moments of sort of being yourself, being a real person. And that's where you can sort of start to generate some of that empathy and actually break through, just being another sales rep and getting that meeting. But I think there's definitely a little bit too much just in the market in general, leaning on the automation piece. Cause like, that's nice. You can send 500 emails by 9 a.m. every day. Right. And then go back to bed or play video games. Like that's happening. So I think the great SDRs are still leveraging all that automation, but they're injecting, the little bits that can't be automated, that genuine human element in there. And that makes all the difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Michael, I was going to go to you anyway.
I was just going to, there's actually, I think 2 really interesting points from both Nick and Tito there. So next thing, which is around the volume at the start, is I'm going to say something quite controversial here, which is that it's actually better to do bad outbound than to have done nothing at all. And the reason I say that is because you learn from it. I'm sure all of us in this room, when we first started trying to do outbound, it probably, if we look at our old messages of what we did, it probably sucked, but we learn from it. You may get a couple of people saying unsubscribe and you're like, okay, maybe I need to change my messaging here, versus doing nothing, waiting for people to come to you. So that's the first thing. I think it's actually better to do bad outbound and learn from it than to do nothing at all, especially in the early days, like Nick is talking about. And then the other thing that resonated is what Tito is saying about calling. I actually feel like the way things are going is that calling is almost going to be like a thing to stand out because people are calling less and less. We're seeing this a lot at SaaS companies where people are like hiding behind emails and LinkedIn. And I think a lot of it's coming from a place where, a lot of like millennial people or people who are getting into SDR roles who are like recent graduates, they're like early 20s. They're not even used to like phoning their friends. They're like WhatsApping, texting, like Facebooking their friends. So not even used to like having calls. So what's happening is you're then asking them to do it with like business people or C-level people who they're super intimidated by. So I spoke to the CEO of Cognism the other day, which is like a kind of Zoom info type tool in the UK, if you haven't heard of it. And he said literally his number is on his tool, Cognism, and someone could cold call him and say, hey, no, you're the CEO of Cognism. I got your number off Cognism, right? And start a conversation with him. And he said he's had like 1 cold call in like the last 3 months he's picked up. And he was like, that's how you speak to me. Like Tito was saying, like, pick up the phone and have a conversation with me. He's like, I literally get 100 sales emails every day. All they've got to do is pick up the phone and they can ask me loads of questions. And that's the thing about calling is it's interactive. For me, email is more of like a complementary awareness channel. You can book meetings there, but where the real magic is going to happen and the real like sales in inverted commas is on the phone. So yeah, if there's any kind of like younger people listening here, like new in the role, like don't be scared of the phone. Like it's scary at the start, but as soon as you pick up the phone and speak to like C-level people, you realize they're all just like us. They're all normal. They all go for drinks. They all like exercise. They all have families. Some of them go to like Burning Man. It's like not intimidating. It's like pick up the phone and speak to these people. So,
yeah, I think that's a great point. And to kind of pull on that thread a little bit, I was doing an objection handling exercise with some young SDRs quite recently. And what we were talking about is the fact that this objection could it come in via email or it could come in a live conversation. How much easier is it to answer that and handle that objection when you can ask another question to uncover what the actual root of the objection is? Because it's unlikely to be what they said it is. It's the not interested is not a real objection, or the no budget is like, well, you don't even know how much it costs. So, you know, and the answer over email is like, I don't know, like hedge your bets and try to ask one good question, but they're probably not even going to reply. So if you pick up the phone instead, or if you, you know, in the first place had been having a live conversation and got thrown that objection, your chances of handling that are absolutely hundreds of times better. Yeah, really great point there. There's another kind of school of thought around the progression of the SDR model. And I think we're seeing it even just in kind of the complexity of tools that exist and sophistication, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, so is another answer to sort of the improvement of the SDR model more along the kind of tools that they have at their fingertips, and leveraging kind of smarter automation. What do you guys think there? Like, Tito, what are you seeing kind of coming down the pipeline?
There's so many tools that SDRs need, and too many companies, you know, buy the tools and give them to the SDRs. I think it's, you know, one of the only roles where like you go buy 15 tools and you're just like, here are your logins, go do work. Like, it's crazy. Like, you can't operate it like that. You need to have an SDR ops person who orchestrates the tools and enables things. So like things that we've done is we integrated the Outreach API with Slack. So when we book a meeting, there's a meeting notification that goes out to the channel, tags the AE, and it says, hey, John, we just booked you a meeting with the VP of marketing at Coca-Cola. It is John Stewart. It's scheduled for this date and this time. You can find the CRM record here. Boom. That's it. So now the AE can go find it, find the information. The recording is already in there. They can prepare. We don't need to do anything. Like, it's amazing. But you can only do that if you have SDR ops. If you're having your SDRs work like monkeys, and every time they book a meeting, they got to open up their email their AE. Like, come on, people. Like, automation comes. Now, is automation purely going to be on like how the SDRs do the outbound motion? No, I think there's so many automations of like internal processes. The other thing is like, stop hiring SDRs in the US with college degrees to have them do data research. That's absolutely nuts. Why don't you hire a bunch of people from Upwork in the Philippines, China, Bolivia, I don't know, wherever, pay them $6 an hour and have those people go into your ZoomInfo, LeadIQ, Lucia, Cognism, PIPL, Bombora, intricately. I mean, I know like 17 to 25 maybe data tools you could use. You should buy like 7 of them, figure out what complements each other the best, and hire somebody for $5 an hour to go find the phone numbers and emails for your SDR. That's the easy, boring part that everybody hates. And then allow your SDR to make 150 calls a day because now they have the time and they can personalize the emails and make them really good. It's not hard once you understand how it should work. The problem is too many people like just don't get it and think that the answer is more volume. Like, it never is. It's orchestration, it's automation at every part of the place, and mostly on the internal system, not on the external.
Gotcha. And Michael, I'd like to hear your take on this, because so much of what you guys do at Growth Genie is focused on like the psychology, which of course is a human element. We have yet to figure out how to automate that kind of thing. We're not, sophisticated enough in that way. So how do you see automation playing a part in sort of fixing the potentially broken SDR model?
Yeah, no, I think automation is still huge. I mean, one of the things we see is that like we always recommend personalize the first email, do something like Tito said. So I was targeting he. So notice you're hiring SDRs and AEs. If I was targeting you, I'd say I was listening to your webinar on, is the SDR model dead? Just one line of personalization at the start. And then what we find, funnily enough, is often you'll get the response, not on the first message, it's personalized, it's on the reply, which is an automated message, which is one line. And all the idea is that they scroll down to the email you've already sent. And this is a big problem I see, is like people who are doing like personalization because they're like, oh, I've written such a good message, I'm just going to send one message and I'm going to get a meeting from that. The other part is if you personalize the first email, take all of those notes and put it in your CRM, because most people they do that research and then they leave it on one message. use it in your cold call, use it on LinkedIn. Once you've done that personalization once, you can use it throughout your sequence. So yeah, 100%. Like most of our sequences, I would say are like 80% automation and like 20% personalized. You just need like a couple of bits of research in there. So definitely use automation. The other thing on the technology side, use call recording. Like I know to all of us, this is basic, but the amount of companies that aren't using call recording tools is absolutely mental. And it's like they're still just doing role plays. So it's like all of us here, we're sales leaders and we're doing role plays with our SDRs and they're selling to like data science leaders. It's like, how can we pretend to be data science leaders? You've got to be recording your calls and listen to actual calls your SDRs are doing rather than doing this like role play thing. So like we don't work with companies that don't use call recording because we just think it's absolute madness to do that in like 2022.
Yeah. And Nick, you use that in a big way, right? As you were kind of building up, storing the information from the first conversations you were having at Sendoso. So what's your take on call recordings? And then also just the other tooling or technology that is going to play a big part in the SDR model?
I mean, 100%. I'm a huge fan of trying to automate absolutely as much as you can and basically remove any blocker so that all that SDR is doing is spending time on things that are specific to human intelligence. Like that's where you can draw the line too. Like, is this something that requires a human intelligence, or is this something that a trained monkey could do? Right. And if you're treating your SDRs like trained monkeys, you're going to get trained monkey quality work. Right. So it's like, that's pretty straightforward. So yeah, call recordings. I love that Slack automation Tito talked about. That makes total sense. You're going to get out what you put in, and your SDRs are going to either live up to the quality of work that you hold them to, or they're going to just, confirm your expectations if you think that they're just, supposed to be doing a bunch of blasting and sending crappy messages. Like the confirmation bias is real on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. And then to kind of speak, we'll kind of finish it out here. I will answer Elisa's question as well in the last 2 minutes, but to kind of think from the opposite side, when does the SDR model categorically not make sense? If there is such a scenario, when is that, Nick?
Well, I think there's really two categories that come to mind. Like one is to Tito's earlier point, like if you're Yelp, right, like the math just doesn't work. So we don't have to go too far down that hole. I think it's pretty straightforward for people. Like there's times the math does not work. Period. End of story. Fine. Your AEs can do high volume, but you also can just have AEs that might look more like SDRs in that model too, where, maybe you do have SDRs, they're just closing, right? So I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but there's a math that supports the SDR-AE relationship. The other time where I think there's a misconception about whether you need SDRs is that sort of product-led growth world. What I think a lot of people don't realize is Slack and Asana have large sales teams. Asana, I believe 2 years ago, had to outbound overtake inbound in terms of like where the revenue comes from. Box has a large sales team. Dropbox has a large sales team. A lot of these companies didn't upfront, but I do, and I think there's a lot of founders and early stage companies that feel very cool for how they don't have to have sales team, have an SDR team or prospecting or B2B, outbound marketing because of all their product leads. Just be aware that there's very little evidence that that's going to scale. So I don't know if that totally answers the question, but I think it's worth calling out.
It does, for sure. And Tito, what do you think? When can we say for certain or close enough to it that the SDR model is not the right choice?
I'm very data driven. I will look at the metrics, and again, you can a little bit of repurpose, right? So like if you're looking at the traditional cold outbound scalable SDR team, I will stick to my guns and say cold outbound, my chances are as follows. If your average deal size is over 50K, 98% chance that you can figure it out. If you're between 30 and 50K, you have a 50% chance. If you're under 30K, 98% chance that you won't be able to figure it out. It doesn't mean that it's impossible. It doesn't mean there's a hard line or whatever else, but that means a scalable, repeatable revenue engine built through cold outbound SDRs. And that's your starting ground. Now, can an SDR be repurposed? And, are there other metrics you should look at? Yeah, of course. It varies so much company by company. You're talking about those mom and shop furniture companies. Sure. I've also, if you're calling real estate people or facilities, like there's so many things that matter, like if you're calling VPs of engineering, your connect rate on the phone is 2% or lower. If you're calling directors of facilities or facilities managers around the United States, I've seen the connect rate be like 11%. So just right off the bat, you're having like your ramp period for the SDR changes dramatically. Like if you're making $100 a day, not a lot of people are, but if you are, like my team is 100 to 130, you're able to have like on an 11% connect rate, 15 conversations a day. In 1 week, you've had 75. On the 2% connect rate at $30 a day, you're having 3 conversations a week. It'll take you 2 months to have as many conversations that we had in 1 week. So a lot of things kind of like vary and change and so on and so forth, but just look at your data. And if you don't have time to go spend 20 hours reading blogs and finding revenue models, I'll tell you this, your SDR needs to produce in cold outbound 300K in revenue to be worth it. And if they're working some marketing leads, maybe 500, 600K. If you get there, you're winning. If you don't get there, you're not winning.
Cool. Michael, when is it not a good idea to have an SDR or the outbound model at all?
Yeah, I agree with Tito on the average deal size. I think if your average deal size is super low, and also you can't do it at volume. Like I think you made the example earlier about like the furniture stores, like if you can get 50 meetings a month, fair enough. But yeah, do the maths. If your average deal size is 3K and it's hard to get hold of people, you can get 10 meetings a month and it's not worth it. Look at the data. And then also in terms of like the model being broken as well, which we were talking about earlier, I think what's happening as well, the SDR model is evolving. I don't think it's dead. Like we were talking about earlier, I don't think anyone really thinks it's dead. There's more SDR positions, open SDR positions than there ever has been in history. So if anything, it's more alive than ever. But I think what's happening is there's this really bad buyer experience. And I think it comes from this thing where like the SDRs doing this, it comes from the alignment and the handoff between the SDR and the AE, because what's happening is they're repeating a lot of the same questions. The buyer's getting interrogated. And I think the way sales is evolving at the moment, people want things on their terms more than ever before. So I feel like if your SDR is actually going to do that initial call, you've got to give some value. You've got to give like a little snippet into your demo. And the way I think sales is evolving, if you're looking later through the sales cycle, is you've got to do a little bit of discovery and a little bit of demo on every single call you're doing. And the advice I always give to salespeople is on every single call you have, you should learn something new off your buyer and they should learn something new off you. And if that doesn't happen, then it's been a waste of time for everyone.
Great advice. Elise, you've been waiting minutes for us to get to your question, so we'll answer it. So this goes back to our idea about the SDR being a training ground for that AE. What is the trigger for an SDR manager to look for to say like, hey, this SDR has proven themselves and now they're ready to move into that AE role? Nick.
Well, I mean, you should have like promotion criteria. Certainly if you have a significant size SDR and AE team, I get that early on, you're not going to have specific criteria. I think it depends also on what that AE role is. And this is also good advice if there's any SDRs out there. If you're going to go take an SDR role, you should try to understand if the AE roles if they have like junior AE roles, or if it's a company that's just selling to enterprise. Good chance you're going to get stuck at SDR for 4 or 5 years if there's no velocity sales motion. So I think in order to promote that SDR, like, I don't know, I'm a fan of like a year. I just ballpark it at a year. I don't think you need 3 years of SDR. I think if someone hits goal for a year, I think they're ready to sell, given that that's, a somewhat high velocity sales transaction and you're not selling to, HPE or IBM. But a good litmus test is, would you rather have them selling? Right? Like, is that someone that you feel like you're losing out, not having on the sales floor closing deals, right? Where do you think like you should feel that when you go to promote an SDR to AE, you should feel like you're missing out on having them selling. And that'll be a good sort of push. Nice.
Well, 2 minutes left. Thank you so much for joining us on this debate, to our 3 guests. And of course, to all of you guys joining us in the audience, people that are watching back later, people that put things in the chat. We're so grateful to have you here. Nick, if people want to learn from you, learn more about Sendoso, where can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, Nick Casale on LinkedIn, nick@sendoso.com is my email. Yeah, always happy to chat.
You're going to get prospected. And Tito, what about you? Where can people learn more about you, what you do, get in touch with you?
Just find me on LinkedIn, easy to find name, and follow me or add me. If you're watching this debate webinar, whatever people want to call it, just mention that in the LinkedIn Connect request and I'll accept you. I've been more careful there because I'm close to my 30,000. So
nice. And Michael, what about you?
Yeah, you can go to our website, growthgenie.co. Couldn't get .com, unfortunately, as a domain. And Michael Hanson on LinkedIn, very active on LinkedIn. So yeah, feel free to connect with me there. And yeah, feel free to pitch me, call me. I'm always open to hearing different sales conversations. So
amazing. Well, thanks again so much for joining us, guys. It was a pleasure having all of your perspectives. And yeah, thank you to all of you joining us from YouTube. Great to have you as always.